So I'm Sanjay Ghodke. I'm an architect at Stanton Williams, and I was the exhibition designer for the Spellbound galleries at the Ashmolean. So with all these sorts of projects, we begin with dialogue. Really, is where we start. So we had meetings with all the curators and trying to really get to the bottom of the narratives and the stories behind all the objects. And from that, we didn't really come. Before that, we didn't really come with any preconceived ideas. We wanted to let that inform the design, and so we then took our thoughts, but equally then had to kind of look at the challenges that the spaces provided to us. There were essentially three topics. There was the cosmos, the protection of the home, and witchcraft. And we have three rooms, but two very domestic-sized rooms and one very tall room. And I think that was really one of the challenges that we faced, that all the objects were quite small, yet we wanted to somehow engage with this height in the second room. And so we wanted to create quite an atmospheric exhibition. We wanted to kind of play on the ideas of intrigue and mystery that were inherent in the objects themselves, but not to overwhelm them. So it's a sort of delicate balance. So it's an interesting question. I mean, I think one of the fascinating things about working in any exhibition is that you get to delve into a world that isn't your own. And I must say, this probably wasn't something that I knew a lot about. But what has been really interesting is listening to people that are totally passionate about these subjects. And you go on a journey and you learn about all these things, and you realise that actually there are things that you did or you can continue to do that are, is magical thinking. I think the objects that related to the protection of the home struck a chord with me. I found that quite intriguing and sort of fascinating, that a home that many of us live in old homes, and it made me feel that actually the walls have stories to tell. There are maybe objects in my own home buried in the walls, in the floorboards, up the chimney, that I don't know about. And I thought that was kind of intriguing. It made me kind of reflect on my own sort of experience. Within the gallery itself, I think that kind of led to an interesting design solution, that actually there were these small objects, but yet they had quite intriguing stories or mystery around them, really. And it was those that we tried to create more sort of drama around, really. So we wanted to kind of explain a little bit about how those objects were found, almost the mystery of them being up a chimney or in the floorboards or within the wall. And so we created this structure where we tried to create an abstraction of a home, really. And we created a kind of skeletal timber frame. Within there would be these two chimneys. And we would have different types of cases that were kind of quite flat that you would look into, cases that we would kind of look at as if they were objects in a wall. And so there was an element of presenting them the same way these objects were found. I mean, the intriguing thing that we did here was that through conversations with the curators, we decided that we wouldn't have labels next to these objects, and that was a really interesting thing to do, because in a typical museum environment you see object label, and often there's that question of, does people read the label first or do they look at the object? And what we wanted was for people to approach this object with the same level of intrigue and mystery that someone may have experienced when they found them. We didn't really want them to, and the explanations are there on the side walls, but it was a kind of brave move, I thought, that we were allowed to do this almost, because in most environments maybe we wouldn't be able to. But I think that was one of the joys, really, that we got to sort of be more playful with the way these objects were displayed. Going into a chimney, looking up, seeing these objects just almost disappear into darkness, added to that level of mystery. Equally, putting this mesh around the structure created moments where you would see silhouettes of objects and silhouettes of people within the structure, people outside the structure. It sort of created a lot of it acted like a veil, really. So I think that was kind of really interesting. one of the most, I suppose, one of the most difficult things was that we, as I said maybe previously, that we had quite small objects, and it's how you engage with the volume of some of the spaces really when you're actually displaying quite small objects. I mean, for instance, in the protection of the home, there are, you know, literally sometimes a pile of old shoes, but yet the stories behind them are potent. But you know, if someone saw that in a small showcase, it may look unimpressive. So it was, I suppose the challenge was how do we create something of the theatre or the drama around that story without overwhelming the object, and sort of maintaining that balance. But as with most things, I think when you have constraint, you get, invention comes from that basically, and so actually those things are often benefits to the project because you push yourself harder, you come up with, it's a challenge almost of how you do something, and I think actually they led to some of the more interesting design moves in the project. I think on the whole it's been, I've really enjoyed the conversation really, and delving into a world that I didn't know anything about, and I think that's been really interesting, and I think that's the kind of joy of working on something like this. I think one of the most rewarding things has been equally just challenging the way interpretation works within an exhibition. I think when we started the conversations, we talked about how people will engage with this, and one of the interesting things we did was we changed the way people enter. We created an antechamber at the start, and we decided we'd actually pose questions, because people may come and think, well, I'm not, none of this really matters to me. I'm just going to look at some objects and, I'll walk away. But we wanted to challenge people's beliefs right at the start. And I think it's only through that conversation that you can kind of start to challenge how things are done and how the exhibition design will evolve. And I think that was really interesting, that we started with these questions that actually made people question their own beliefs before they entered, and some of that then be reiterated along their journey. So seeing that come together in a really short time frame, we built it in a week and a half and then installed it in a week and a half, is thrilling. I mean, you rarely work on things at this pace and get that kind of fruition from it. So it's lovely to see something that starts off as a little model like this, and then suddenly it's built around you in such a short time frame. I would probably say greatly changed. I didn't know a lot about many of these things. I suppose some of them you are sort of semi-familiar with, but equally I think it's interesting because sometimes you look at things and you're aware of them, but you don't kind of sort of consolidate what exactly you're looking at. I think even something simple as a love lock that was tied to a bridge. It's something I've seen all over the world, yet I didn't really think of it as an object that was maybe binding love in that way. And what happens to it when they were broken off in this instance? Does that mean the love is broken? Do people didn't want them back? I think it's interesting. It sort of gets us to look at things it got me to look at things in a different way, I think. And I think equally, I think I've started reading books around this subject matter, which has been really interesting, because I think we all think magically, and I think it kind of, whether you realise it or not, I think that's been the kind of interesting takeaway for me, that actually you realise that it pervades your life more than you think. I think what's really interesting with all temporary exhibitions is you get to test ideas, and you work with different themes, and they bring up different ideas. So the wonderful thing here is that you can be a lot more fluid, a lot more playful, and test different ways of doing things. I think here we had to work quite economically, really, but get impact from it. Within the budget, we wanted to create something that had atmosphere, and it's how do you do that within limited means. And so I think building structures out of very simple material, just timber, sort of 2x2 sections of timber, and wrapping it with mesh. It's how can you create atmosphere? How can you create impact? How can you create all of those sorts of things with minimal means? And I think even though it's it's a temporary exhibition within within some rooms, you get to play with the qualities of architecture. Really, you get to play with materiality, light, vistas, the way people experience space, objects. So actually, all these things, all these lessons that you learn, how something's lit, how you bring something to the fore, how you make something recede, all these sorts of things. Will sort of become part of your kind of baggage, effectively, that you own, that you will put into all projects, and it changes the way you approach anything in the future, really. So I think it's been a real joy to work on, frankly. I think working on the galleries and the discussions that we've had, I think has made me realise that I am a lot of what I do already could be construed as magical thinking, and I probably wasn't aware of that term before, but I think it makes me realise that a lot of what everyone does really, or still I think is still kind of magical thinking.